Well, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Speedway Soccer. Nashville SC lost their first match of the season. MLS teams have struggled in the Concacaf Champions League and the latest USMNT roster drop for the last round of World Cup qualifying. We're going to cover that all for you tonight. I'm Ben Wright, and I'm joined tonight by Chris Ivy and Jonathan Slape. Guys, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good.
Let's just get into it off the top. We've been talking off air a little bit about the U.S. roster drop, and I think that would be a good place to start tonight. So 3 games left in this World Cup qualifying cycle for the U.S. to book a trip to Qatar, and Greg Berhalter has called up 27 players to his squad for this latest round of World Cup qualifying. Slape, I'm just going to toss it to you first. What's your initial thought on this group of 27 players?
If you include boards, it's about what I thought it would be. Not really any, big surprises. I think probably the biggest thing is, I think Gianluca Busio, there were some questions on, if he was going to be healthy enough. He finally got his first start back after that hamstring injury after the back for Venezia. My biggest concern issue is when we get to the defenders, of course. For those of you who may not have seen today, Serginho Dest stretchered off in Barcelona's match today in the Europa League. That's just kind of a situation that would happen based on, they put together this roster before anything, before those games even took place today. So, that's not really a concern. Greg Berhalter did say in his press conference that after they evaluate Dest, it could be a Bello Vine situation. But probably my biggest head scratcher concern is at the defensive. So James Sands and Eric Palmer Brown. I understand that Chris Richards is hurt, and I also understand that there has been some issues with John Brooks. Berhalter we don't really know what happened there. I don't think either. I mean, I haven't watched Eric Palmer Brown for Troyes in France, so I can't say he's not very good. But James Sands, really? I mean, we saw that he can't play a back two. We saw that during the Gold Cup. He's not great in the midfield at the national team level. So I just don't see what purpose he serves.
Chris, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Slape that it's about what we expected. As far as Sands, the one thing I kind of thought of that the reason why he could be in this roster is if you end up in a situation with Tyler Adams picking up a yellow card and getting suspended for that last match in Costa Rica, obviously at that point you would start Kellen Acosta at the 6, but you don't really have a true backup for him playing in that deeper defensive midfielder role. I don't love it. Sands hasn't really been getting playing time in Scotland, but there isn't really anybody else that has played in that role, at least in a more defensive posture. We've seen Busio there before, but generally when we're more on the front foot. So that's the only thing I can make of it. And as far as, Eric Palmer Brown, I don't think any of us are going to claim to be watching much Troy's action to opine one way or the other. But when you have the situation going on with John Anthony Brooks for whatever reason where he's not getting called up, you kind of have to go a little bit deeper into the pool to find somebody who can provide cover.
My thing with Eric Palmer Brown is probably I would have rather seen Mark McKenzie. I know McKenzie isn't playing a ton right now, but you have a guy that knows the system and has played in this system. You have him come in instead of Palmer Brown, who has not been with this group. And I think especially in this last window, I think there were a lot of decisions made of we want guys that have been with this team before, and it's not bringing in a ton of new guys. That maybe be why we don't see a Joe Scally on. That may be why we don't see some of these other guys who've got a little hot. I am very excited to see Jordan Peacock in here with the Fords. He is the most in-form striker that the U.S. national team has. And so the fact it was a shame he missed out last time, but I mean, I think the number 9 position for the national team is still a probably the biggest question mark for this team. And so I think when you're going to need to score goals, especially in you may not get a lot of chances against Mexico. PFOC seems to be able to take those chances when they come. It's just good to see him in the lineup.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Luca Della Torre. Obviously, it's a disappointing that it's going to come at the expense of Weston McKennie, who has arguably been the most informed player for the U.S. in the last couple months. But I thought he looked good in the last cycle. And from Greg Berhalter's press conference today, it sounds like he's at least a big part of the plans to replace McKennie and should see the field. You touched on Joe Scally a little bit. What do you make of just kind of the lack of natural left backs aside from Anthony Robinson?
I mean, there's not any, like, George Bello moved to Dealfield. He got his first start. It's not a slight on Bello. He's coming out of the season straight over to Europe in the middle of the season. So of course there's going to be some ramp up time. And then Sam Vines he's had some injuries, struggled for form a little bit. I mean, I think it's kind of been something we've talked about for the longest time with the U.S. national team is there's just not a lot of left backs. And so I think it's a shame that our next best left back is also possibly one of our best right backs, and he got hurt today. But I just don't know Scally bringing him in this situation. If this was a different window and wasn't the last, I would be a little more upset that he wasn't there. But I mean, I think right now is you roll with the hand. You go with the cards. You can get something out of them.
So 3 matches left for the U.S. On Thursday, March 24th, they'll play in Mexico at Azteca, which is obviously kind of the marquee matchup. But then after that, they'll have 2 huge matches. They'll play Panama on the 27th and Costa Rica on the 30th. Chris, I'll toss this to you first and then Slape. Just out of these 3 games, what's your kind of minimum that you think the U.S. need to hit for you to feel comfortable with their chances of qualifying?
I mean, minimum 4. Obviously, if you get that win against Panama in the home game, you at least create enough distance between Panama. Costa Rica doesn't have that hard of a slate to go. They do have Canada at home for that first one. I think they've got El Salvador away in the second, and then obviously they host the U.S. in that last match. So that's part of the concern there too, that you really want to get a draw either in Mexico or in Costa Rica, both insanely difficult places to get points for the U.S. in past qualifying cycles. For me, though, and I think we're kind of talking about this before we got on air, I think Slape and I have kind of a little bit different opinions of how to approach this Mexico match. For me, it was rest Tyler Adams, rest the principal starters, and save them for Panama. I'm concerned about the altitude, the short amount of rest. Ultimately, we can qualify without picking up a point in Mexico, and I think that's got to be goal number 1. Tyler Adams is sitting on a yellow card. I don't trust his ability to not pick one up down there, but I think Slape will have some different arguments on that, and which are equally as valid.
Yeah, I think where Chris and I disagree a little bit is I think this Mexico team, first of all, is probably the most beatable team that we have come up against at the Azteca away from home for the U.S. I will concede we've still never won there. We've been a draw in qualifying exactly once. We've won in a friendly, but not in a Concacaf World Cup qualifier. And I see that the match against Panama, while it is a must win, I think you can get that done with a different, I don't think you need your A1 players to win that game. So what I would personally do, I mean, I don't want to see Gio Reyna against Mexico unless we have to get a goal. I think with that midfield, I'd like to see Adams, Acosta, who I know a lot of people see Acosta as the backup number 6. but I think throughout his career, he's more of a box-to-box guy, and probably his instincts are a little closer to the things that Weston McKennie may do, not to the same level of flair and skill, but he definitely is more of a box-to-box guy, and he is the king of CONCACAF shithousing on this national team. So I want him there, and I think that if Adams gets that yellow card, you can roll into Panama with a midfield of, Acosta, Bucio, Musa, or Acosta, De La Torre, Bucio. Like, I don't think you can play De La Torre and Musa together because I think they do too much of a similar thing. But I think there's 3 guys there that you can run into. You can run into Panama starting any of these 6 midfielders, as long as you get the right balance. And so I would rather, if Adams was to get a yellow card, then have him available for Costa Rica, because if it's a do or die match against Costa Rica, I want Tyler Adams on the field.
All right, guys, before we wrap up this USMNT section, I'm just going to throw it to you. Do they qualify for the World Cup?
Yes.
I don't want to say that
was
loud
worrying.
at this point. I mean, I think they will, but gosh, is it nerve-wracking at this point?
There's still some residual trauma from 2017.
Some residual trauma? I mean, there's a lot of residual trauma. Like, I mean, this I could go into an hour-long diatribe of the residual trauma from the failure to qualify at Cuva, but we won't dive into that. We'll talk about happier things like a 2-0 loss against FC Dallas.
Yeah, let's get into that. So Nashville's 3rd game of the season after a win in Seattle and a draw in Minnesota. They go and play Dallas, and then things just kind of come unraveled in the last 10 minutes. Frank O'Hara penalty kick in the 85th minute, and then an Alan Velasco goal in the 87th for Dallas to win 2-0. Chris, I'll just throw it to you off the bat. What's your initial thoughts of this match? What were your reactions while you were watching it?
It was one of the worst matches that we've seen from Nashville since deep last year. I mean, the closest thing I can think of is that Red Bull loss, where the club lost 2-0 as well. It never looked connected. There was no real fluidity with the build out. I mentioned it in my column afterwards. There was less than 10 touches in FC Dallas's penalty area the entire night. You're not going to pull off results if that's what happens. I think Gary pretty quickly on was okay with a draw, but it was pretty evident from the start that Dallas was getting opportunities, and frankly, they were lucky not to score at least 1 or even 2 goals in that first half. They certainly had their chances, and ultimately it was a fair result from that standpoint. They were certainly in control of this one.
Slape, what did you make of it?
Man, I would argue that the Red Bulls game wasn't the worst performance we've seen out of this team. That Atlanta game against basically a USL side was just a awful performance top to bottom when you take into account the level of talent they were playing against, especially at home. But yeah, I mean, it was a frustrating game. I think we've talked both, on the side in chats. I know Davey and them covered it on Nashville Soccer Show, and Ben, you also talked about it a little bit on Paradise Pod, but like, it definitely felt like this was not the game to play the formation. It felt like a time to change, especially knowing about what we do about FC Dallas, where they're not going to play as much through the middle. They're going to get it out wide. And, when you try to clog the middle and they already want to go out wide, you really negate a lot of those advantages you would, normally have when you're playing 3 midfielders.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that a little bit more. I mean, I think we've seen Gary Smith kind of roll with a system until it doesn't work. And I think it didn't work from the outset against Dallas. and I said this on Paradise Pod too, but I think one of the other issues, I mean, I think you were spot on about midfield and forcing them wide, because that's kind of what Dallas wanted to do anyway. It also felt Nashville has struggled against teams that press, and it kind of goes back to their last 2-goal loss, which was that loss in Red Bull. But they have guys in the back who can play through a press. I mean, Walker Zimmerman and Dave Romney can both play through a press, and it just felt against Dallas that they would get, whenever they did get through the press, they would get it to midfield, and then they would have no outlet because CJ Sapong and Hani Mukhtar were so isolated that whenever they got through the press, they would just kind of dump it off to Sapong, and he'd just kind of be up there by himself. And so that kind of felt like it's almost counterintuitive, but that felt like a game where you almost need an extra body up there and attack just to give them another option when they do get through that initial line of the press. Chris, what did you think of Gary Smith's decision at halftime when McCarty was obviously hobbled to kind of stick with that same system? Slape, I know you have thoughts on that, so I'll toss it to you next.
Yeah, we were talking about this before. I mean, it's a puzzling decision. I mean, you had a golden opportunity to take Dax off there, save your substitution window, and make a change, because obviously things weren't working. And we've kind of touched on, and I've seen everyone kind of touch on this week, that the system didn't make sense from a defensive standpoint of, if you're forcing a team to go out wide that wants to take it out wide, then you're playing right into their hands. But for the same reasons, it didn't work offensively. A lot of times Nashville was resorting to playing long balls and trying to build the offensive attack that way. Well, what's the point of having 3 central midfielders if you're bypassing them in your buildup anyway? So exactly what you're saying there, Ben. I would rather see someone further up the field if that's going to be the way you're going to play. Give Sapong some help in corralling those long balls and then playing them off it and building. So to me, it didn't make sense. Halftime would have been a great opportunity to change, and then the change was kind of forced upon Gary 5 minutes into the second half.
Yeah, Slape, I know you have some thoughts on that change. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Chris touched on it briefly, but, the fact that you have 5 substitutions, you only have 3 sub windows. However, if you make a change at halftime, that does not count as a substitution window. So the second you make the decision to wait and see with Dax McCarty, if he can go, if he is not able to, and we've rarely seen Gary make a double substitution in, say, the 50th, 55th minute. I wouldn't want to see his substitutions that early. That just would tell me that you did make the right adjustments at halftime. And so to waste that you have to make that substitution for Dax McCarty, bringing on Alex Mule. You're then saying that I'm going to make multiple subs, and at least one of those windows, or both, unless you're going to make a triple substitution. And then if you're going to make the sub, I thought that changing the formation, because we saw that when Moyle comes on, he just plays more of that central role. I thought it was the perfect opportunity. If you're going to bring on Alex Moyle, you can move Eric Miller back into that 3. You play Moyle at right wing back, and then you can allow Leal to drop a little bit deeper and kind of serve as that linking piece in between the midfield and the attack, which was something that we were so clearly lacking. And so, I mean, we'll probably beat the Loba horse till it's dead or he starts. But if you're not gonna we can even remove that part from the equation. I just think that there was other personnel, or with that same personnel, there was some tactics that could have been adjusted to really solve some of the issues that we were seeing in that game.
So, I mean, the thing after saying all of that is that Nashville was still in position late in the game to get out of there, which would have been a very good point on the road against a Dallas team who I think have kind of taken a lot of people by surprise. And then the penalty kick. It feels like the second week in the row where a controversial penalty decision has kind of impacted the result for Nashville. Chris, I'll just throw it to you here. Did you think that was the right call? And were you surprised that it wasn't reviewed?
Probably the right call. It was soft, that's for sure. But give kudos to Paul Arriola for doing the veteran savvy move of, as soon as he felt pressure from behind from Jack Mayer, he went to the ground and drew the penalty. The bigger problem I had with it, honestly, was that it was a shot. It wasn't a cross. It was never meant to even go to Arriola. And by allowing that shot off, we gifted them Arriola the chance to make a meal of it. It was interesting because obviously, and I've touched on this before, I have the unfortunate pleasure of watching games with the home team's broadcast feed through ESPN Plus, and you watch it back on Nashville. It's like a light and day difference to the FC Dallas commentators. It was an unquestionable penalty. No doubt about it, 100%. And obviously, different view from the other side of the field. But for me, if you're going to call it in the moment, it probably is a penalty. I would have liked for them to review it, but if you're going to run in from behind somebody in the middle of the box, you take that risk.
Yeah, I will say, so before I touch on the penalty, I would say that if Nashville fans are so lucky for the fact that Tony Husband and Jamie Watson are the consummate professionals, and yes, we'll get a little bit of homerism in the broadcast because that's just what's going to happen with anyone. But they do such a good job of trying to call it straight. And yeah, I've watched some of those. You'll listen to some of those broadcasts, and it almost sounds like a bunch of fans are the ones calling the games. So I think that Nashville fans are very lucky to be able to hear both Jamie Watson and Tony Husband on the call. But on the penalty, I think it's the right call. I think it's a call that I want. It's an action that I want all of our strikers doing. If Nashville didn't get that call, I would be incensed. I just think, unfortunately, it is just the foil to what we saw against Minnesota when Hani Mukhtar doesn't get that call. And so I think if last week either Mukhtar gets the penalty or that situation doesn't happen at all, I don't think it's as much of a talking point coming into this game. It's just such a bright contrast between the end of the two games. And at the end of the day, Nashville didn't deserve to win that game. They didn't deserve to, I would say, didn't really deserve to get a point out of that game. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a penalty, and I hope that Gary and Guppy are showing the guys that film on what Arriola did, because I want them doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, and Gary talked before the game just about how Paul Arriola is one of his favorite MLS players. And it was just really smart from him. I mean, Jack Mayer had been on for all of 20 seconds, and Arriola knew exactly where he was and knew that if he just slowed his run a little bit, there would be contact. I mean, it's like Slape said, it's the kind of move that you want all of your strikers doing. And yeah, Dallas deserved a win in that game. I think it's frustrating for Nashville fans that it came that way, but you can't really argue that it wasn't a fair result. All right, moving on from this, Nashville are back on the road again, and they will be for a while. But going back on the road to Real Salt Lake, who have surprised, like Dallas, they've surprised a lot of people. They've beaten Seattle already, and then last weekend in New England in absolutely ridiculous weather, they beat New England Revolution 3-2 in a game that Carlos Gil was not happy about. Guys,
he should have been.
He shouldn't.
He didn't see that game. I mean, I think we were all three were talking on Twitter, what games are you watching? We got an hour before the Nashville game kicks off. What are you watching? And I'd started watching the Cincinnati game and quickly switched over to this game, to the New England Real Salt Lake game, because it was a vibe.
It was an absolute mess. The field was off. I mean, I was going to even put in our rundown. I mean, it's hard to take a ton from that game or even learn much about what Salt Lake are about just because of how awful the conditions were. Carlos Gil was spot on in his post-game interview, which is, by the way, if you haven't seen it, I think it's already going down as one of the better post-game interviews in MLS history. But yeah, what have you guys made? I'll toss it to you first, Chris. What have you made so far of Salt Lake? I mean, I think it's fair to say that they've kind of exceeded all of our expectations so far. But what have you seen from them so far?
Yeah, they're a plucky group that if you come in and underestimate them, they'll make you pay for it. And that's kind of been Real Salt Lake's history for the last several years. Of they're constantly picked, not to make the playoffs, finish 9th, 10th, whatever it may be, and that they consistently find their way into the playoffs. It's not off star power. They're generally well drilled. They are pragmatic and get results where they can. Obviously, you have Pablo Mastroeni, who's the coach now this year, but he's a Gary Smith disciple. He was Gary Smith's captain at Colorado in 2010 when they won the MLS Cup, and it's kind of cut from the same cloth. So you'll kind of see some similarities there. The real impressive thing is that RSL has been able to do it without a lot of their bigger name players. Krylak has been hurt. Aaron Herrera has been hurt. David Ochoa hasn't featured this year. So that makes what they've done this year all the more impressive, that they've been able to – the players that are more recognizable names haven't been involved in yet. Here they are still pulling off results against Seattle and New England.
I mean, and then you also figure in the fact like Rubio Rubin is also injured. They haven't they lost Albert Rusnak in the offseason to Seattle. So like, I mean, this is an RSL team that is performing. Like even just the results themselves are impressive. But then when you, like you said, like when you get into who hasn't played, it's even more impressive. And so, going into this game, it's gonna be a tough match. Gary has struggled to get points in RSL at Rio Tinto, so I would not expect it's going to be a conservative approach, and I really don't blame Gary for going in looking for a draw. So I'll ask both of you, what system, or what do you guys do with a system for this game?
I mean, I predicted before the Dallas game that they would go back to the back three system that we saw for most of last year. I feel like it still gives you kind of that defensive baseline that you want on the road, but it frees a play a lot. I mean, if you go in that kind of 3-4-1-2. It frees Leal up a little bit more to get more involved in the attack, kind of like we were talking about. Having him push up a little bit more against Dallas would have been really helpful. It also gives you the option, if you want to get a guy like Ake Loba more involved. I think that seems way too aggressive, at least from the start, from what we've seen so far on this road trip. But I think just going in that back three gives you a mix of defensive solidity with also a little bit more freedom in the attack. So I think that's what I would do, but who knows? I mean, they've gone with the same system for 3 weeks in a row, and it sounds like Dax McCarty's fully healthy. So that 4-1-3-2 should be an option again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the health of Dax McCarty. If he's healthy, it would not surprise me if Gary trots out the same lineup that we've seen in the first 3 weeks. It goes back to kind of how the opposing team builds their attack. So the reason why we said that, that system may not have been the best option for Dallas is because they've got good wide players. They're athletic. They move the ball quickly vertically. That's not so much the case with RSL. They've got kind of your more technical players on that kind of 2 line behind Bobby Wood, and they're going to look to play more in the middle. Aaron Herrera's not in there, so I'm not as much concerned about service from out wide either. So it wouldn't surprise me if Gary goes back just because it fits this opponent a little bit better than it did last week. But like I said, it really does come down to if Dax is healthy. If he's not, I just don't see us playing that same system.
It sounds like he is healthy. Sorry, Slape, go ahead.
I was saying the other thing to keep in mind is there is also a break after this. Because it's not the condensed schedule that it has been the past 2 years. MLS is taking off the international break, so it's not a situation where you're going to have to rotate and keep in mind of guys that are going to be gone for international break. I still roll with the back three because I think that is what we've seen this team do well and perform their best in. And I think Leal's defensive capabilities get downplayed a lot when he's playing as that guy in behind Mukhtar and Sapong. He has the ability to track back. He will track back. It's not something, but he serves as that good link. So I think it gives you a good balance between both, defensive solidity and just linking the attack together a little bit better. I mean, I would give Dax, I know Gary said in the press conference today that he's back and he's fully healthy. I'd still give him some additional time off. I'd roll with Davis and Godoy as a two-man midfield. In that back three setup should plenty of defensive solidity. I think if Gary runs with that, do you think he plays Miller as the center back, or do you think he plays Mayer as the center back and then pushes Miller up into that right wing back position?
Yeah, I think it's Mayer at center back and Eric Miller at right wing back. Chris, you touched on this in one of your columns. I don't think we've seen enough from Alex Muyl at right wing back, especially not to go with it on the road.
No, it would make a little bit more sense if they were at home and on the front foot and you wanted Muyle's additional ability in the attack. But it's like what I touched on in that column. The times that Muyl has been kind of shaky is when he's defending in that final zone. It's hard to trust going on the road with that. And so I think Gary's going to play it safe. He's going to play for the draw. And I think Eric Miller's the choice there.
So we obviously touched on Dax McCarty, who it sounds like he's healthy. Gary said he's been practicing all week and should be in contention. The other bit of injury news is Robert Castellanos was loaned out to Tampa Bay Rowdies. And 12 minutes into his first game with Tampa Bay, he went down with a non-contact injury. Turns out that he has fractured his ankle and returned back to Nashville and had surgery yesterday. And Gary said today that he expects him to be out for at least 12 weeks, potentially longer. One of the questions we got on Twitter kind of in the build up to this was how does his injury affect Nashville's center back depth? So Chris, I'll just toss it to you. Do you think it has any impact on their depth immediately, or do you think it's something that they can live with for the short term?
I think they can live with it. I mean, if they were loaning him out for the year, I think they were kind of prepared for him not to be involved anyway. We could have always seen a Jack Mayer situation from last year where he goes and gets a few matches of game experience and then comes back the better for it and starts contributing. But you've got Josh Bauer there, who they acquired from Atlanta, who's a young guy, similar profile age-wise to Castellanos. And they just spent a number 10 overall pick on Ahmed Lundmeyer, who by all accounts is a very talented center back. You would like to see a little bit more, time before he gets thrown into the fire. But the other part of it too is the center back depth issue isn't as big of a concern if Gary keeps wanting to go with this kind of stacked midfield lineup and not playing three center backs. If he reverts back to that system with three center backs, then yeah, you may want one other body out there, but I don't think it has to be some big, trade or anything like that. It could be some smaller deal just to get another warm body back there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think if you're sending Castellanos out on loan, you were already saying that you were fine with the depth that we have. I mean, it's just a shame to see him get injured because I do think, I know the club is very high on him. He performed very well in the one start he got last year, even scoring the goal. So hopefully he gets back. I know, Ben, you said 12 weeks, but I don't see a need to really address that, through any kind of transfer or anything. I also think if Nashville does go out and get a right wing back, Eric Miller can play as a third center back. So, I mean, I think that's a much bigger need, and the versatility of Eric Miller kind of solves that depth piece if you're concerned the center back depth.
All right, guys, moving on to our last topic tonight, Concacaf Champions League. It's been a bit of a mixed bag for MLS teams in this latest round. Montreal couldn't make the most of their. They had a solid performance on the road, just losing 1-0. Couldn't really make the most of that and drew 1-1 at home. They're eliminated. New York City FC looked like they were in excellent shape and then went on the road to Comunicaciones, and things got much closer than they would have preferred and ended up tying 5-5. They advanced on aggregate. Seattle Sounders are currently playing. They're up 1-0 on the road in Lyon, and so they have a 4-0 aggregate. And with that away goal, they look absolutely set to advance. And I think the biggest story is New England Revolution, who won 3-0 at home against Pumas, then lost 3-0 on the road, and then lost in penalty kicks.
Hey, what does that do to the Revs and the power rankings? Does that move them up, down?
They're up. It moves them up. They're untouchable at the top now.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that, especially we'll make sure to let the Revs fans know that it does move them up in your power rankings.
Their trophy is in the mail. I mean, Slape, I'll just keep it with you here. What was of those 4 results? I mean, I think it's fair to probably call that Seattle result done and dusted at this point, and I probably just jinxed that whole thing. But of those 4 results, what was the most surprising to you?
I mean, I wasn't necessarily super surprised about the Revs result. I mean, they were playing some, they're missing a lot of guys. They were, I wasn't necessarily too surprised. I mean, I think, Brewster, his comments going into that really bite him on the ass when he said that they don't need to go in there and score goals in that Pumas does. And so Pumas went and scored some goals. But I would have been impressed with Comunicación through this tournament. I mean, it was already an upset over the Rapids. They 3-0 loss on the road to NYCFC. And then they make it really interesting as they go back home. And there were some absolute bangers scored in that game. I can't remember if it was which goal it was for Comunicaciones, but that rocket from outside of the box to get through traffic was just an incredible strike. So even though they didn't make it through, I still think it's a big result for them. I still think probably your 2 best teams in this tournament are the 2 MLS teams that are left in NYCFC and Seattle. But if NYCFC plays like that against Cruz Azul, they're in deep shit.
Chris, of the teams left, do you think? I mean, obviously they all have a shot, but do you think this is going to finally be the year?
They would play. I said, actually, don't NYCFC? They play Seattle.
Yeah,
it'd
be the 2 MLS teams and the 2 Mexican teams. Yeah. So we're guaranteed a MLS Mexico final.
Okay, well, I guess that makes my question easier for you. Chris, do you think this is finally the year that we see an MLS team win it? Yes and no. I mean, I don't want to say that's not an answer.
Yes and no isn't an answer.
If I was betting on it, no. My heart says that Seattle is the team that is finally built to do it. They've got, top to bottom, that roster is full of guys who can take over a game, who aren't going to be intimidated by the moment. They don't need a lot of possession in order to score goals. They did it even at home in the first leg of only having like 35% possession and still rocked Leon for 3 goals. And honestly, it could have been more. So I think Seattle's well built, but we've seen this tournament too many times to count of you get that hope and the heartbreak comes. And while these aren't the best Liga MX teams that have ever been in Concacaf Champions League, Cruz Azul is still probably the favorite for this. It's not going to be easy for Seattle to go down to Azteca and pick up the result that they're going to need, whatever it may be, off of their home leg. So I think Cruz Azul is the favorite here, but Seattle is probably the best chance MLS has had in a while.
Slape, does an MLS team win it?
Oh, No, because I've seen this too many times. I've seen too many Concacaf Champions Leagues. But I do have a question for both of you, and I see that I'm asking a lot of questions. What new stadium does NYCFC call home for this next round?
Are they going to go back to Los Angeles?
It seemed to work.
I think what you do is you just clear off a patch of Central Park and just play in the park, you know? It'll at least be wide enough.
Could be a New York tradition.
It is wider than Yankee Stadium.
That whole situation's a mess. At least Nashville will play at home here in 5-6 weeks. I think it's 45 days at this point. I'm basically just saying this so I can drop Geodis Park and Geodude. Thank you, Andy, for that. Also, happy birthday to Andy, our producer, who is off doing whatever he does on his birthday. Guys, I think that
we don't have an explicit rating for what Andy's doing.
Yeah, we cannot get into what his birthday celebrations entail. Okay, we have one final question here from Donald that I'm going to absolutely regret sharing. I'm going to regret bringing this up. So you're not allowed to explain your argument at all, but just what's your answer? Doors? Are there more doors or wheels on planet Earth?
If you have critical thinking skills, it is clear that the answer is wheels.
It's doors. No question about it.
It's obviously doors. You know what? Here we got one final listener question that we kind of missed initially, so we'll go back and circle back and hit it. It's from Wesley. Lovitz hasn't looked like his usual self. Is that the new formation or is that a game plan? Chris, what do you think?
I would say part formation, but more of a reflection of the first 3 games have been away, and Lovitz has been kind of pinned back with his defensive duties. Seattle and Minnesota, great wingers, obviously a lot of danger from FC Dallas as well. So I think it's more of a game state thing, and Lovitz will come around. He'll have more involvement in the attack.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think especially if you look at who they've played the last 2 games and their quality of wingers. Of course, Lovitz is not going to have the opportunities to get forward, and he's going to have to focus a little more on his defensive responsibilities. So not really anything that I'm super concerned about. And I think that it'll be good to also see him. I do think part of it is, though, him not playing in that wing back role, which I think is his best position rather than just as an out-and-out left back.
I think we'll see the best of Lovitz when they come home and he's whipping in balls to Ake Loba, who will start every match. Guys, it's thanks for joining me tonight. It's been a fun catch up. Make sure to check in at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. Chris, Slape, and I will have all kinds of content out in the next couple of days. We'll be previewing the Real Salt Lake match, breaking it down. Davey and Lucas and Will be back Tuesday night with another episode of the Nashville Soccer Show. We'll be back late next week with another episode of Speedway Soccer. And until then, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening.
Definitely not Thursday night, though, because that is US-Mexico. So we will be.
We might have an After Dark special.
Man, yeah, we'll see.
It'll kick off at 11 at night.
Yeah, I mean it'll be late.
It'll be even more of a train wreck than these usually are.
Let's do it.
Okay, we'll put that on the books. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us tonight.
Never go full shepherd.
Nope.